Hello everyone, one more time. My name is Sasha Dovzhik. I'm an associate lecturer in Ukrainian at the School of Slavonic and East European Studies at UCL, and a special projects curator at the Ukrainian Institute London. I'm very grateful to all of you for coming here tonight. Instead of enjoying wonderful weather outside, you decided to spend this evening with us. I really appreciate it. Russia's Ecocide in Ukraine is an emergency event. It is put very quickly in emergency circumstances as our urgent response to the destruction on the 7th of June of the Kakhovka Dam in the Kherson region in southern Ukraine, which is of course under Russia's occupation, hence it's Russia's Ecocide in Ukraine. The scale of environmental destruction is shocking. What has also been shocking for many Ukrainians is the kind of muted reaction of the international community to event of such enormity, to the crime of such magnitude. So this urgent discussion is doubtless just the beginning of our grappling with the enormity of this crime. The effects of Russia's destruction of the dam will be doubtless felt not only in Ukraine but throughout the world and for decades to come. This event is organized by the School of Slavonic and East European Studies in partnership with the Ukrainian Institute London, and we were able to put it together so quickly as part of CSIN now, a series of events which provide experts an opportunity to respond to breaking issues which happen in our region, in Eastern Europe. And I'm particularly grateful to Dr. Ben Noble for his assistance and for helping to organize it so urgently. So to start this conversation, I'm joined by the fantastic panel of environmental activists and experts. So to my right is Daria Tsimbaluk, a PhD, a scholar of environmental humanities in relation to Ukraine. She was a Max Hayward visiting fellow at St. Anthony's College in University of Oxford, and is now writing a book about the environmental impact of Russia's war on Ukraine, which will be published by Polity, so we're looking forward to that. Her recent opinion in Open Democracy is very topical and again very urgent, and I advise all of you to read it. Oля Hercules is an author, chef, activist who writes cookbooks and teaches for a living. She is a native of the old Kakhovka in the Kherson region, so directly from the affected place. She has written four books. Her first one, Mamushka, won the prestigious Fortnum and Mason Award for the best debut cookbook. She also wrote Caucasus, Summer Kitchens, and Home Food. Oля is co-founder of Cook for Ukraine, a global initiative to raise funds for those affected by the war in Ukraine, which already raised over £2 million. Amazing. Ola's awards include Observer Rising Star in Food 2015, 50 Best Champions of Change, and the list goes on and on. I'm very grateful to Ola for joining us. Anna Ackerman is a board member of Ukraine's largest environmental NGO Center for Environmental Initiatives, EcoAction, and a policy analyst at the International Institute for Sustainable Development. Since the beginning of Russia's full-scale invasion, she has been focusing on the topic of Ukraine's sustainable reconstruction, supporting efforts of civil society from around Europe in rebuilding a green Ukraine. Before this, she was engaged in advancing key reforms in Ukraine's energy sector and more ambitious climate policies in the country. Finally, Jonathan Turnbull is a cultural and environmental geographer at the University of Oxford. His PhD research examines how understandings of nature are produced and contested in the Chernobyl exclusion zone in Ukraine. Alongside his academic work, he is co-producing a film about the dogs of Chernobyl and those that care for them. And right now he is also organizing a series of events called quite aptly Ecocide. So please join it, Ukrainian Institute London, is among the partners of this series, and it's a very necessary discussion at this point. So thank you everyone for joining us here at such a short notice, and I will probably begin with a very introductory question for Daria. Could you please give us an overview of the destruction and how it affected ecosystems in the region?
Yes, I might not be able to give a full overview. I don't think, actually, in many ways, very possible at the moment. But I was, the amazing efforts to document things on the ground and to rescue, and just today also 8 people were wounded in Kherson, 1 person died, among the rescuers. So to think also of the conditions in which people are working is really heartbreaking. But on the way here I was looking at Ecocide recent statistics, and one of the things in terms of the houses that destroyed, so I'm going to find the numbers, is 3,801 in Kherson and 540 in Mykolaiv Oblast. I'm from Mykolaiv. And there are many, there's so many numbers of how many things are destroyed, how many tons of oil are now in the water, and things like that. But sometimes I feel also overwhelmed by numbers, and I wonder, as a person in environmental humanities, how can I respond to them, and what does it do? And also sometimes feel that numbers can be quite dehumanizing and normalizing the situation on the ground, because one thing that I learned, so my previous work has been with people displaced from Donetsk and Luhansk Oblast, and I focused on the aspects of displacement, and one thing, the way we study displacement is also through numbers. Mostly people always give you statistics of how many people, and also not everybody is documented, but how many people are displaced, how many people are employed, etc., etc., etc. And when I started talking to people and interviewing them, I was really surprised that they were talking about gardens and plants and other things, and it was kind of like it fell out of the pattern. But the more I worked and talked to people, I realized that any displacement is literally a loss of a world. So behind all of these houses and behind all of the statistics we see, this is really for each person and for each being as well that might not be able to express the habitats that we are losing. This is really, when you start to think about this as a loss of 1,000 million worlds, it's kind of, the mourning is really endless, and it's really hard, like my brain, to be honest, shuts down trying to even imagine, to comprehend the scale of this and for how long it will continue to affect so many lives on the ground, transnationally, of course. And thinking of as a person, I'm not a practitioner. I'm not somebody who actually makes change on the ground. In that respect, I work with stories. But thinking about numbers and stories, for me, it's been also very important the way stories are told. And I believe for Ukrainians it has been very important. And I think Ukraine has been, or Ukrainians, or all the Ukrainians have been so active and successfully telling the stories and mobilizing people across the world to stand in solidarity. Including the president. I think that played a really important role in the way the stories are told. But also in the way the voices are marginalized and perspectives, and we've seen, and Mariam Nayem just published a piece on that experience of gaslighting that you mentioned, of being muted, following the Ecocide and following the massive humanitarian catastrophe, that you would see these reports of presenting it on both sides, all the speculation on who has done it, but also, for me, what really struck me, because I've been working in environmental humanities, I checked all pages of the front newspapers in climate emergency, and climate agenda is really big in this country, but also in the West, generally speaking, and not only, of course, but living here at the moment. And for me, it was really disheartening to see that nobody wrote about this. And I don't think it's the first time Ukraine actually hasn't been featured much, and I think it has to do with the way we also see the war as a kind of one event, quite often spectacular, related to death, and then climate emergency is another kind of event, and then colonialism is the third kind of event. But actually, they're deeply, deeply entangled. And if we do think about climate emergency, it's colonialism is right there in the middle. But part of the problem is also that people still talk about this war as a conflict, and then both sides come out. There's no kind of in a big media outlets, there's no understanding that this is colonial invasion. And if you start from this, there will be completely different reports included on Kakhovka. And so it's really, like from the, all this year, but from the explosion, you kind of like fighting all of the things at the same time. And this is what actually then prompted me to write, because the only thing I can do really is work with words and to kind of intervene, to try to speak up. But yeah, and speaking of like narratives as well, I also wonder the way, like, if Ukraine is featured, it's mostly features through grain. And it also really makes me think of like, what does it mean, or when we get concerned for the future of Ukraine as a grain exporter, what does it actually mean? And like now these days there's a reconstruction, the big reconstruction event for Ukraine. A lot of us cannot attend it. It's not really inclusive, but I guess one thing that makes me wonder in all of this is how can we put the communities which are on the ground at the first priority. It's not about grain exports, it's not about energy, it's not about markets, it's not about whatever, but and Oleg will speak about the construction of the dam actually, but I think the thinking of the communities is not really there internationally, but also unfortunately quite often in Ukraine as well. So it's not really an overview, but it's kind of scattered thoughts.
No, thank you. I think it's very important for us not to forget that Ukraine is, and this war do not exist in a vacuum, and when we think about climate emergency, it's one of the global challenges that are directly affected by what's going on in Ukraine. These things are not separated. Again, capitalism is another big issue that you highlighted in your op-ed. Russian colonialism, fossil fuel economy, climate emergency, and the war in Ukraine are tightly interconnected. But just coming back to communities from these big issues, I wanted to pass the microphone to Ola, who actually was born and grew up in the region that is most catastrophically affected by the destruction of the dam. Ola, if you could tell us about the landscapes that we've lost because of this, and maybe about the history that preceded this disaster, man-made disaster.
Yeah, sure. So I was born in 1984 in Old Kakhovka, which is just 20 minutes away from New Kakhovka, where the dam has been. And I left when I was 12. I went to live in Cyprus, but my parents, eventually stayed in Kakhovka. There was their house and the garden just by the shore of the big reservoir, Dnipro. My grandmother's house, where my uncle and aunt lived as well, was just 15 minutes away in a village called Lyubimivka. And, the dam for me was always kind of as a child, or as even as an adult, because I would come back to Ukraine and see my family at least 3 times a year. And when you get to the dam, I know that I'm 20 minutes away from hugging my mom. And we'd go through the bridge of the dam. And I'm sorry if I get a little bit emotional today. I will try to keep it together. But every time I would pass the dam, I'd think, okay, in 20 minutes I'm going to see my mom, I'm going to give her a hug, she's going to give me this amazing meal, and we're going to go in the garden and walk around, and my children are going to see my family, and it's going to be amazing. In the past year, my family all left in April last year, when the war, when the big war kind of blew out, and they abandoned their houses. At the moment in Old Kakhovka, I don't know what's happening right now, but I know that the Russian occupiers were living in my parents' house. During the winter, I would just think, because they lived in a summer kitchen, where we had a wood-fired kind of a wood burner, and I just thought, are they chopping down our orchard? Are they chopping all of the trees that we've grown for so many years? And that was actually one of the most heartbreaking things. We just thought, you know what, they can destroy the house, they can mess it up, they can do whatever, but all of the stuff that we grew around, is that destroyed? And that was like a little thought that just kept lingering in my head. And the whole dam destruction was always on the cards, and I knew that it might happen because I knew that the Russians have mined it from below, and that's how they blew it up. But I kind of just kept that thought away from my brain because I just couldn't cope otherwise. But I started doing quite a lot of research into the history. I just thought, let me think about the dam in another way, let me find out, because it's never a happy event when you build something huge like that. What happened? So I actually interviewed a lot of my family. My parents are actually from Mykolaiv region, and I'm the only one who was born in Kakhovka in the 1980s. But my aunt, my uncle married a local woman, my aunt Ludmila, who features a lot in my books and has helped me write my books because she knows so much about local history of food and nature and growing. And I interviewed her extensively, bless her, I think it was really hard for her. That's pre-dam, that was last year I interviewed her. And she told me about the world that existed before they built the dam. So, the Russian Empire has always wanted to do something with the steppes. They wanted to turn it into, the old Muscovy. They said, oh, it's too wild, we need to tame it, we need to, build loads of forests there because we just don't know how to deal with it. When they don't know how to deal with an environment, they just pillage it, they kill it. So there's actually, even in the 19th century, there's been loads of plans of, how do we get this really fertile earth and turn it into like a big agrarian, space where we will use it. And then in the 1920s and 30s, Stalin came up, or maybe a little bit later, maybe closer towards the 50s, he came up with the plan, policy of the transformation of nature, which actually kind of meant subjugation of nature. And the Ukrainian steppe was a big part of that. Not just that, in the north of Ukraine, they were like, oh, there's too many marshes and bogs, we're going to dry them out so we can use the land to grow stuff. In the steppes, they did the opposite. They said, we'll build these dams and we'll expand the Dnipro River, we will turn it into a big sea, and then we can do all the shipping, and it's also like strategically good for us, and we'll irrigate the whole area, which was quite dry naturally, and we'll just turn it into the basket that it is, that has become for the whole world, not just Ukraine. And they did build the dam, and it was a disaster. It was a complete disaster. My Aunt Luda remembers it. Whole villages were drowned. Some people were given just 3 days to pick up their things, and bulldozers came and they destroyed their houses, and within 3 days, after the dam was kind of like, the waters released, they were flooded. Near Zaporizhia, there was a really important place called the Great Meadow, including 5 Zaporizhia sieges, which were like historical Cossack settlements. Everything was flooded. I'm just going to read to you about the landscapes a little bit, just about the floodplains. So in the steppes, apart from all of these kind of like virgin lands, never plowed, which were arid, and horizons as far as the eye can see, there were also little pockets of life, little pockets where people learned how to live with this environment, especially where the little rivers went into Dnipro. They were called floodplains. Floodplains included kind of these, where bull reeds and bulrushes grew, and floating ferns and water chestnuts and weeping willows and elder trees and guelder roses and loads of wild, fruit trees like cherries and pears, etc. And people, made their lives there. They grew their vegetable patches right on the shores of these little rivers. They were a really important thing in Ukrainian psyche, in South Ukrainian psyche. This was the way that people survived in the area, and it was very sustainable because there was just this, limited amount of people that knew it really well, that lived locally. Even things like during Holodomor, when the Soviets created this artificial famine, people that lived in these floodplains were quite secretive about them. Like, Bolsheviks didn't really know. It was like a mysterious thing for them. And people actually went during Holodomor, during this forced starvation, when Bolsheviks came and tried to confiscate their, sacks of wheat or sacks of potatoes. People went to the floodplains and kind of like drowned their goods there, and this is the way they survived. There's also loads of sorrel and mushrooms that people could pick. It was just such an important thing to us, and they were absolutely beautiful. And with this construction of the dam, 65% of these floodplains were destroyed. They were gone. Villages, churches, everything was flooded. People lost their homes and their gardens, and actually quite a lot of the times people weren't relocated into similar houses where, you know, it was a separate little clay house, you know, what we call Ukrainian chata, with all of their vegetable patches. They were urbanized. They were sent into Khrushchevkas, into these, like, you know, high-rises in New Kakhovka, and people actually, you know, all of these ecosystems and people living within those ecosystems, it was destroyed, more than 65% of these floodplains. And still, we survived, we persevered. You know, when I was growing up, I knew of floodplains, of the surviving ones. There was a really beautiful one 15 minutes away from Old Kakhovka called Krynki. There's a video on my Instagram where I went with my new husband and my son and my mom and my friends, and, you know, we swam in the river and we laughed, and it was just absolutely beautiful. It is gone now. It's completely gone. It's never coming back. The damage is irreversible. And it's a cycle. It's basically, you know, and to us, it's happened again. It's not just, it's not a new thing. Like, it's not another, you know, it's not a flood that's just happened randomly. It's actually really triggering. It's like, oh my God, I can't believe they did it to us again. And, you know, there were some people, especially younger people during that time, it was the 1950s, that went, oh, you know, the new sea, you know, the new Kakhovka Sea, we were able to irrigate these lands, and, you know, all of these young people went to New Kakhovka and settled there. And now all of those people and their children, their houses, their livelihoods have all been destroyed. And, you know, it was extremely hard on the 24th of February. But when I woke up on the day that they blew up the dam, I didn't actually look at the news. I kind of, like, I was trying to kind of, like, actually not do it first thing in the morning, and then I started getting messages from my friends, and they're all saying, I'm so sorry, I'm so sorry, I'm so sorry. And I don't know what awaits us. I just want to talk about it, and I want people to understand that it's a cycle, and it's a cycle that we absolutely must break, and Russia must apologize, and they must make reparations, and they must admit to what they're doing, to how little they care about people and about ecology and about nature around us. You know, another reason why the dam was built, and other dams, you know, Kakhovka was just one of the dams that they've built throughout Dnipro, like destroying Dnipro all the way, was to supply water to Crimea. Because in 1943, or correct me, they've deported the whole population of Crimean Tatars from Crimea, 200,000 people they've put into cattle trains and sent them off to Central Asia, where Crimean Tatars had this beautiful way of extracting water. Really sustainable way, actually many ways. They had these canals based on an ancient Iranian system. You know, they really knew how to live within nature, just like we did in Khersonshina. And once the Crimean Tatars were gone, the Russians came and they were like, oh, how do we grow stuff here? We don't know how to get water. Oh, let's go to Kherson, build this dam, pump the water through. It's very, like, ham-fisted, you know, very destructive. And it's all kind of very related. I don't think they meant to blow it up as much as they did, to be honest with you, because it doesn't make sense, because they do need to pump water to Crimea. Or maybe they realized we're going to lose Crimea, so, you know, scorched earth policy is something that they do a lot. But I just really want people in Britain and all over the world to understand the history of it, to maybe, you know, delve into the history of it, to read books and articles. You know, there's an amazing article by Lenenko that I read, which you're translating soon?
In spring.
In spring. But yeah, it's just, it's an issue that I really hope that people understand a little bit deeper and help us. Like, I'm still waiting for those environmentalists to put the dots together and just say, this is not just a genocide, this is an ecocide, and it will affect the whole of the world. Well, thank you for listening.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for sharing this. It's very it's very important to get this local knowledge, because these things come as a surprise to people outside of Ukraine. But as you knew about the danger of the dam, I always knew that there was the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, because I come from Zaporizhzhia, and I know very well that warfare in a country with 5 nuclear power stations is not a great idea, and I've been thinking about it for years, since Russia invaded Crimea in 2014. And now my nightmare is everyone's reality, and Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant's safety is undermined by the blowing up of the Kakhovka Dam, because this is how the nuclear reactors were getting cooled. There is currently a pond which supplies the water for cooling the reactors that do not need that much water, because the station is in this frozen regime. It does not produce electricity right now, but this is not sustainable. And I would like to address Anna now, because EcoAction has been doing absolutely amazing work through the years of Russia's war against Ukraine, documenting instances of ecocide, including this last one. And could you please tell us a bit more, so that we could understand the bigger picture of ecocide in Ukraine and its consequences for other geographies and for other places around the world?
Thank you. You hear me well? Like this? I have a microphone, but it sounds good. I will do the following. I will probably take it from Ola's story, which is absolutely heartbreaking. And it was heartbreaking for all of us who work in the environmental field. We have massive calls from journalists. And it's not like we are experts in everything. No, when you say those environmentalists, it doesn't mean anything. I'm specializing as an environmentalist in energy and climate. There are people who specialize in biodiversity, others specialize on many other things, on industrial policy or so. So I'm also going to talk about everything. But for everyone, it was clear. I mean, we were worried this may happen, but when it actually happens, you know, it is indeed very hard to go through, and especially when reading Ola's tweets, and for people who lost their homes. But I think, you know what, I will start with the Kakhovka Dam. And then I think it's a good example of also the way we are thinking about reconstruction of Ukraine. And we have this big conference happening this week where I'm taking part of. It's not that inclusive probably, but I'm there talking about reconstruction. And then to also, I think it's important for us to actually explain what Ecocide is. It is important. So on the Kakhovka Dam, Ukrainians are incredible. You wouldn't believe it, but the disaster is happening, but on the second day we start thinking how to rebuild. Do we need to rebuild? How do we do that? You know, because we are used to crisis, we are like in crisis every single day. And honestly, one day seems to be like 1 year. And Daria was saying, no one is right about Kakhovka Dam, because it's been only a few weeks, honestly, also. Like for us, it's been like, it feels like 2 years. Every single day feels like years. I have goosebumps when I'm talking about this, but it's really, all this time since 24th of February is another life that we have to go through. And indeed, talking with numbers is complicated because of that, because it's overwhelming. But let's look at Kakhovka Dam. There is, of course, but we are putting aside humanitarian aspects and thinking about rebuilding or not rebuilding. There is different options. We fully rebuilt the dam the way it was before, and in fact, today in London, at some of the events, I think it's representatives of energy companies and saying, okay, let's just rebuild it. What does it actually mean? It's returning to this exactly very inefficient use of freshwater resources that Ola was explaining about. Because it was natural, you know, was not supposed to be there, and all of this agriculture, yes, it's a huge agriculture area, it's 500,000 hectares which would be affected. 500,000, I mean, it's insane, it just makes no sense. Yeah, but the water use there was really inefficient, and if we rebuild the dam, you know, we have to ask ourselves, does it make sense? Then how long does it take to rebuild the dam? At least 10 years before it will be ready, before the power plant will function again. In 10 years you can do so many other things, right? All right, another extremum is we fully destroy the dam, because actually we are very lucky the dam was not fully destroyed. Had it been fully exploded and destroyed, we would have seen an incredible flood. It would have been so much worse. Everybody's saying it would have been much worse because you can check modeling that was done before. It's horrible. So we were a little bit lucky because they did, I don't know, maybe they indeed didn't want to blow up the whole thing. I don't know what happened. We will have investigation happening. So we fully removed the dam. What does it actually mean? Do we want to actually return to this 1940s or 30s?
Can we?
Right? Can we? Maybe not, because actually the power plant that was there, it was crucial for the Ukrainian energy system because it's balancing the grid. Hydropower is necessary for the energy transition, right? Which is also good for construction. Okay, but there is also some alternative in the middle, because some say, okay, we have to, and actually now the government is asking all of the international partners to help with keeping the dam at least so that it would not be fully destroyed, because again that would be a disaster. We still want to keep it. So a solution in between is keeping the dam at a certain level, just to not make sure you don't have the big flow of water, and then perhaps not building all this hydropower plant that used to be there before. Maybe solar energy, I don't know, wind energy. South is full of that, like, you know, this sort of things. Then with the Kakhovka, we also have different questions. For example, with lost biodiversity, species, and so on. If you would like to read more on this, check the articles by Ukrainian Nature Conservation Group. They did an incredible analysis. They listed all of the biodiversity reserves, all of the different things that we're going to lose. Some of them probably forever. Some of the species are unique for the world also. You cannot put a price tag on that at all. It's very complicated. It's impossible. But now I'm coming to the overall picture of damages to the environment. So if reconstruction of Ukraine is estimated by the World Bank at around $400 billion US, the Ukrainian Ministry of Environment estimates the overall damages done to the environment by Russia since only 24th of February of 50 billion. This is not the way World Bank calculates, because they just look directly at the economic costs. Again, some things you cannot calculate, but it's a huge sum also. And here I'm going, and let's look at 2014. And let's actually understand how much Russia already did before the dam. And no one, there were just a few organizations, no one was looking at that. The east of Ukraine, the occupied regions of Ukraine, there is coal mines flooded with all the toxic water that came up, and many were saying, you know, it's going to be a disaster if Ukraine regains those territories. There is no even technical solutions in the world to clean those things up, because normally it doesn't happen in normal world. Nobody wants to flood the coal mine, because it should be done properly. The water should be pumped out. But Russians, for them it was too expensive, boring. They just didn't do that. All of the industrial facilities of Ukraine's east, which is industrial region, again destroyed or abandoned with toxic materials flowing out and so on. Absolutely horrible. And honestly, again, we cannot know how much it would cost for us to deal with that. And another question, probably is going to be, the sum is going to be enormous. The question would be, do we even want to deal with that? Because there will be other priorities. There are so many people who need help. Why would we suddenly run into the east once we liberate all of our territories? We go to the east and we start, cleaning up things there. No, we should be taking care of people who are still alive, who need jobs, who need, for their livelihoods and so on, to kind of return to normal life. So there will be priority setting. And so I imagine that Ukraine's east, that was heavily polluted, it would be also an interesting piece of pie in economic terms, because there is some rare materials and minerals and things that Europe needs, probably the UK also needs, I don't know, for different types of production. All of us actually will need for batteries. So there may be some cleaning up to produce all of this needed stuff. And actually there may be an interest to come there because it's already dirty, so let's just keep it, keep digging. Looks not very good, but it may well happen, I imagine. So the costs are very high, and then we also absolutely see, and I agree, and I think everybody agrees, and Russia may probably not use nuclear weapons, but Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, and today there was a confirmation, again from our officials, they mined it. They are ready to blow it up if needed. They are refusing to cool down the last reactor running because they are getting ready to do that. And Kakhovka Dam, yes, it will have some impact on our neighboring countries in terms of water pollution and so on, but the Zaporizhzhia power plant, I'm sorry. What can we do? There is many things that we still didn't do, in fact, and we're still waiting and see what happens next, environmental crimes, okay. Oh, the dam, horrible. Oh, the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power, It's actually very hard to suggest what to do, right? It's not that easy. Russia is a terrorist state, and we have to, and this is what we should do internationally, we have to declare it as a terrorist state. There should be more sanctions. There should be sanctions on Russia's nuclear industry, which was still not done, and I'm surprised. They are occupying Europe's largest nuclear power plant. All right, so these things should be done. But also internationally, I come now to the topic of ecocide. Do you think ecocide is defined internationally? It's not. It's not. There is 4 crimes, international crimes, that can be reviewed by the International Criminal Court. Environmental crimes are not among them yet. But there is a group called Stop Ecocide International who proposed the definition that is now reviewed by international bodies in the UN and so on, to actually integrate those and to make ecocide an international crime. So one is defined, it should work. Yesterday we had a discussion at the London School of Economics, and we were talking about Kakhovka, of course, and we were saying, okay, well, we do ecocide is not defined. How do we bring Russia to justice? And some people are saying, if it's not defined, Ukraine has to go ahead, and help international community to define it. Ukraine has to do
nothing on agenda, right?
Let Ukraine, But honestly, this is the way we see now the world. Okay, if it's not there and no one is moving, okay, we will go ahead and help you guys. So I'm calling on you. If I don't know, the audience I guess is very different here. But if you are studying international crimes, if you know anything about or anything, just let's keep it on moving together. Because in the end, it's important for Ukraine to bring Russia to justice, to have Russia pay for what they did, even if that comes in years. Okay, but they have to pay for it. Even if it's in money terms, they have to pay. And it's only possible if internationally this would be recognized as an environmental crime, ecocide. One more probably thing that before, so Eco-Action has been indeed collecting all the information about things that we used to call environmental crimes. On our website you can check, there is a map. And we were very inspired. We thought, okay, these are all environmental crimes, so we will track them all, and then this would go into international court. But in fact, in international court, to prove that anything is an environmental crime, which is defined, so there were cases with Kuwait that actually, it worked, but it needed just 20 years to actually bring anyone to justice. But in order to prove that anything is an environmental crime, it has to be intentional. Everything that Russia did before, meaning intentionally destroying the environment. Everything that Russia did before, like blowing up industrial facilities or polluting water somewhere, you could never prove it was intentionally made to pollute the environment, because they would be saying this is our military strategy. But in the Kakhovka case, this is the case where you can actually find the proof. I'm sure we'll find it. I'm sure we will show to the world that everybody who was saying we don't know where we could do that. I'm sorry. We will find those who are guilty. And in just a few words, sorry, I'm always talking so can never stop. But on reconstruction, and again, the dam is a good example. And there is multiple aspects that are being discussed now. Indeed, this conference in London is all about private investments in Ukraine and so on. And environment is not really a part of this year's discussions. But in any case, when we talk about rebuilding Ukraine better, greener, I think there is more and more understanding that we really need that. We cannot be rebuilding Ukraine with, that will be rebuilding this huge dam, for example, because we think we just rebuilt to the way it was before. None of the Ukrainians want to rebuild to the way things were before. They want to build better. Better meaning modernizing, better meaning making the economy of Ukraine a 21st century economy, making it green, meaning Ukraine could be producing windmills also, heat pumps, energy efficiency materials. Ukraine could be actually caring about the environment and embedding it into reconstruction too. And there is many initiatives, many people who actually, many cities, they're incredible, they're working on that. I will talk about later if there is time, but for sure there is this will, so we'll see what comes out of this conference. But the Kakhovka case, I think, will be very special because we can actually push the International Society Act and actually contribute with this case, but also make it, I think, as an interesting case of a more sustainable reconstruction, the way we're going to manage it, the way we're going to plan it, and hopefully also we will try to contribute to these discussions and to lead them in a good way.
I like the seeds of hope here that we can actually make Ukraine into a case which will give the world the necessary knowledge to deal with such global emergencies. And what I also like is that we do not try to see it as a Ukraine problem. This is a global problem. This is not for Ukraine alone to solve. We do not need the definition of ecocide because it is important for Ukraine alone to bring Russia to justice. It is important for all of us to make this case and to pursue justice on international level. And it is important for all of us to limit the destruction of the environment in Ukraine because it will influence us globally, as I've said, for decades. We don't need to wait till Russians blow up the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. Honestly, we don't want to see the consequences of that. I'm now going to ask Johnny, because Jonathan, I'm sorry. We've been working on several projects together, so I feel over familiar now. Jonathan has been one of the writers in Ukrainian Institute London's Ukraine Lab project. It's an online residency which dealt with global challenges through the prism of Ukraine. So he has been one of those voices who helped us understand how Ukraine can provide some lessons for the outside world in dealing with environmental or information or security challenges. Jonathan works on the Chernobyl exclusion zone, and I'm interested in Chernobyl as people define it, the previous man-made technological disaster of this scale. I'm interested in lessons not learned from Chernobyl, which have led to the destruction of the Kakhovka Dam. Could you tell us your thoughts on that?
Yeah. First, just thanks to everyone for sharing your stories. I thought they were really powerful, and yeah, thank you. And also, we've talked about the definition of ecocide being important for different reasons, but I just had a thought there around the etymology of ecocide, which is around home and to kill. And the way we've been talking about it and the stories that we've heard tonight are all around like the destruction of home, but also home as a more than human thing, the destruction of landscapes of humans and other than humans. So this is something that I've been thinking about when we talk about ecocide. But I think if we get to Chernobyl, as a historical event, I think it kind of crystallized a particular form of ecological and environmental consciousness within Ukraine when it happened. You saw the emergence of Zeleny Svit, or Green World, right after the Chernobyl catastrophe. But also we know that Chernobyl as a sort of political event was massively triggering of Ukraine's push for independence, and also has been described by scholars as one of the major events leading to the collapse of the Soviet Union. And I think in that, what we can see is that Chernobyl as an event really from the outset brought together that environmental consciousness with a kind of decolonial impulse, even if it wasn't called that back then, and fused together really tightly the ecological concerns that we're talking about today with the kind of concerns around national independence and freedom from the oppression of a state which can impose certain kind of environmental harms onto another one. And so I think that's quite possibly a lesson that has been forgotten, which we've seen, and I'm just reiterating here a lot of what you've all been talking about, but the kind of meagre response from environmentalists in certain pockets of the collective West. I think we've come to see that there's a bit of an inability to see these things as connected, and everyone here has given really good explanations as to why they are connected. But I think for me that's one big lesson that was right there from the start that hasn't kind of followed through. But then, you know, I also want to talk a little bit about recovery and what we can think about Chernobyl as an event that has, you know, happened 37 years ago. Things have changed since then. And so my PhD research was spent in the Chernobyl zone, hanging out with scientists and people who care for animals and people who visit there and do different things. And so when you usually hear about nature in Chernobyl, if this was an event that could be described as ecocide in certain ways, if we think about nature in Chernobyl, often it's represented to us through these grand spectacular narratives, David Attenborough, wildlife documentaries, you know. It's really kind of seen to have returned or recovered or come back and reclaimed the territory as its own, this sort of amorphous blob called nature. But then I was interested in kind of getting beneath those narratives. I found them quite spectacular, and I didn't really think that they told us anything much. And when you dig a little bit beneath the surface, you find that the story's not as clear cut as that. Nature hasn't necessarily returned. There's different species and different spaces that have been affected in different ways, and it's kind of what I realised is these narratives of recovery often cast nature as this thing that can just infinitely absorb human or anthropogenic violence. And so when we're talking about recovery, I think, again, to reiterate some of the points that we've heard already, that we're not talking about recovery to kind of pre-nuclear disaster or pre-ecocidal flood event baseline. And going forward, I think it's going to be really important to understand how we live with these landscapes now. So, you know, we've talked about pollution in the east of Ukraine and other places, and these sort of ecological scars. And it's something that going forward, we're not looking for a return, as you just said, to like pre-catastrophe baseline levels, but actually there's going to have to be a lot of work done to understand what is there right now, what kind of ecological damage has happened, but also what kind of ecologies can thrive in these effectively novel ecosystems. And so I think that's going to take a lot of work from mainly the people who live there, who are going to have the most knowledge, but also researchers who can kind of, you know, help to understand what's there and how to help it thrive. And then I would say kind of, yeah, it's a case of after Ukrainian victory to be able to understand how to inhabit these spaces that's been created in these novel ecosystems. So yeah, yeah.
I have another question for you, which is probably hard to answer, but I want us to start thinking about it. What does it mean that the world was not prepared for the occupation of the size of civil nuclear infrastructure such as Chernobyl and such as Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant? And what do we need to prepare for such things? How we can think about this unthinkable military occupation of a nuclear power plant?
Yeah. Listen, it's a really tough question, and I think you know, if you look to the past events, you can't. They are impossible to prepare for in some ways. So nuclear policy tends to be, despite, you know, forming itself around things that could happen in the future, it has tended to be very retrospective. So a lot of policies were invented after Chernobyl by the International Atomic Energy Agency. Many more were instigated after Fukushima, and these policies and sort of actions were deployed in Zaporizhzhia, for example. The power plant was rebuilt following Fukushima to be updated for things like floods. So we're in an environment of risk that's kind of future facing, but also in reality really retrospective. But I think if you think about, you know, what happened with the Chernobyl and the Zaporizhzhia occupations, there's a kind of novel form of warfare being deployed by Russia in many ways in these through these occupations, and it's a kind of a scholar called Svetlana Matvienko described it as nuclear terrorism. And what we see here is the kind of targeting not only of a civilian and national population of Ukraine, but actually it's speaking to like a broader global public as well, because it's and I think one of Matvienko's quotes was like, there's no outside to this war, and we see that materially with Zaporizhia, in that if something did happen there, you know, you've got a nuclear event potentially of the scale, if not more, of what happened at Chernobyl. But then also the novelty has this psychological aspect which is being waged. So if you think of all the things around the nuclear imaginary that perhaps the public are somewhat indoctrinated with through Hollywood movies and whatnot, you've got catastrophic imagery of mushroom clouds, of mutants, of abandoned cities like you have in Pripyat and Chernobyl. And so it's a really powerful weapon, psychological weapon that induces fear. And I think that's something that's, you know, being targeted around the world to put pressure on, you know, the kind of collective West to not help Ukraine. And I think that is something that as a community we can do to prepare for things like this, is to kind of, you know, do our best to get through those spectacular myths of what is happening, but also to kind of somewhat educate people around whether we think this is a feasible second nuclear catastrophe in Ukraine or not. It's quite unanswerable, but I think this form of nuclear terrorism is as much about the physical occupation as it is about the kind of psychological occupation that's going on as well. But yeah, in terms of answering the question about preparation, I think it's a very difficult one that I don't really know.
Mm-hmm. If I may say just a small thing about Ukrainians, in the I think that last summer in the office of Eco Action, in the evening there was I'm reading the news. Yeah, it was August 2022. I'm reading the news and I'm telling everyone in the office, wait, they said that they would blew up the Zaporizhia nuclear power plant. I think there was the news of that sort. And the director looked at me and she was like, yeah, let's go for beers. And because we were already over so much hold on to everything else, everybody was like, yeah, I mean, honestly. This is how Ukrainians are prepared. I mean, you're prepared, I think, early for everything, which is horrible. It's not supposed to be that way.
It's horrific. It's a horrific thing.
Yeah,
way just, but yeah.
Humor is a weapon, right?
It is, yeah.
Especially when you are powerless, what you do, you resort to humor, right? But I hope this is empowering in a way. At least raising awareness and sharing knowledge should be empowering. And I wanted to ask all of you if there are some aspects of the destruction of the Kakhovka Dam that we have not touched upon yet, and you think that you would like to highlight for our audience before we pass the microphone to our members of the public.
Maybe I have one thing quickly, just following what Jonathan just said, and it strikes me actually. So Russians are actually using, because you said that it's a novelty, and actually it's not a novelty that they're targeting big energy, so centralized energy production, right? They did it in Georgia too. There was a hydropower plant, but they also immediately seized basically, and it helped them to seize territories in Georgia. So, but they basically use the things that they built themselves. They seize the things that they built themselves. Because Soviet time, it was all about this centralized, huge centralized system, Stalinist, huge stuff. But when you look at the energy sector, and this is where I think it's also inspiring to look at what Ukrainians do, what they actually understood through this war, and all of the Russia's targeting energy infrastructure. So Russia had all of the plans of the whole Ukraine's energy system, and it was so easy to deal with that. Just like, okay, there is a big thermal power plant, nuclear power plant, hydropower plant, it's just that you damage, destroy, and it's gone. What Ukrainians did, decentralized renewables. You have a solar panel on your roof and a battery, and you're fine. Blackout, you reconnect, and it saved people's lives when they went under occupation in the north of Ukraine. So when we talk now about energy transition for Ukraine now, they don't care about climate, honestly. They care about autonomy, resilience, and resilience is this new energy systems too. It's not about building, you know, Soviet-style stuff. No, it's about actually small-scale, community-owned, close to yourself. You produce, you consume, you go ahead with your electric, I don't know, bike and so on. This is how things should be working, and it makes total sense even more than before.
And I just wanted to quickly mention that it's still going on, and if you can keep donating, if you can keep talking about it, it's extremely important. My parents, who are both 65, and my uncle and auntie, who are in their 70s, managed to leave last April. A lot of people were not able to leave. Maybe they're disabled, maybe they're older, and there was just no opportunity. And actually in the occupied areas like Oleshki, it's a horror. It's an apocalypse. I try not to think about it, but it's impossible. There's people in such desperate situation, and on the unoccupied territories, there's so many Ukrainians that have just gone there and are helping, and it's incredible. Actually, my dad, who's in Mykolaiv region now, who's 65, and he said, I wanted to go there with my van and with water, and somebody on the ground in Kherson just said, don't worry, we're covered here. So unoccupied areas are covered, but the occupied areas, the Russians are shooting at volunteers that are trying to save people. It's apocalyptic. And if you can, I closely work with, there's a charity that you've listed, and I also work with a British charity called The Legacy of War, set up by a brilliant war photographer, Giles Julie, and he works with Ukrainian charities that are on the ground. And just last week, after my plea, in 2 days we've raised £14,000, and he's been sending it directly to his partner kind of charities in Ukraine. So if you can just keep on talking about it, if you have any kind of influence in any spheres, if we can get people to do something about the occupied areas, because honestly it's a complete horror. It's a complete horror, and it's absolutely heartbreaking. But don't forget, don't get lost in numbers or in anything else. If you can keep doing something, we'd really appreciate it.
I think there's also a protest by the Russian embassy on Friday, right? I think it's 6 p.m., is it? Ukraine Solidarity Campaign.
5 p.m.
5 p.m.
No, not p.m. 5 a.m.
In the morning?
Yes.
Anyway, look up Ukraine Solidarity Campaign, so 5 a.m., right? Please double check, but it's a protest against Russia's Ecocide, so showing up, I think, if you really want to. Yeah.
Thank you. I would like to pass the microphone to the audience. I'm sure there are many questions that you would like to ask our speakers. So please raise your hands if you have one. Microphone to the Peter.
Thanks. First, thanks to all of you. This is really quite something. My question is about silences, and not just to what happened a couple of weeks ago, but what could happen. And a year ago, it was when I first learned about the nuclear power plant in Zaporizhzhia from William Colby. And we were at a pub, and he described sort of the potential of what could happen there, which was shocking. And yeah, we took another sip of beer. Look, what do you do? This is already a war crime. The nuclear terrorism label. I mean, if ecocide isn't already defined as a war crime, I assume that's not either. I'm not sure. It should be. The silence is already happening there in terms of the potential, and it seems like this is something that needs to be in people's consciousness before it happens. I don't know how one does that. But from what I understood, Sasha, you were saying that all of the generators or whatever they're called have been shut down except one, but the plant is producing no power. I was wondering, well, why don't they shut down the last one? And then from what you were saying, I understand that occupying forces are not allowing that to happen. That is already a war crime. Why are we not talking about this?
Who would like to, we'll keep the microphone in the audience. Who would like to address this? The question
We're
of
trying to
silence.
talk about it now, but I guess it's now back into the audience and back into the world. I guess, I don't know.
Yeah, I just want to say that, I think it's only, it's Ukrainian government who's still trying to push for nuclear energy sanctions against Russia's company Rosatom, and it's still, the world still did not take it on, right? And the International Atomic Energy Agency, whose presence is now there at the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, but the head of the agency is always going back and forth. I think he visited just like a few days ago again. And actually, I don't know, I didn't even follow what was the result. But he has to be living there at this power plant, so that Russians would be scared to blow it up together with the whole International Atomic Energy Agency. I don't know, because basically by the International Energy Agency, Atomic Energy Agency, being there, we're accepting what's happening, and because it's not a war. I mean, it's not marked as a war crime. You cannot. I mean, maybe with time we would actually write the new international law, but for now, this is the way it is. So it's horrible.
Could I ask actually, with this nuclear sanctions, right? Because Russia also continues building. I know, just to clarify, because isn't Russia also continuing also helping other countries to build nuclear power plants? It's the biggest nuclear.
Russia's nuclear industry so have a closed cycle nuclear everything. And in fact, even Ukraine's nuclear waste is stored in Russia because we don't have enough nuclear waste deposits yet built in Ukraine. And Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant had a new one, but anyway. But yeah, Russia is signing new contracts around the world to build new nuclear power plants. Hungary, for example, surprise. Other countries. If you're interested, there is a great map done by Dixie Group. And we have tons of proposals of whom to sanction. Some, like last year, we were saying, okay, if you don't want to sanction the company itself, Rosatom, sanction the people who are at the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, employers of Russia's nuclear energy, company. We are where we are. I think the world, when there is a word nuclear, the world is just being afraid of everything.
Yeah.
So it's only the Ukrainians who are not supposed to be afraid, I don't know.
Well, I think in Ukraine, because we survived it in a way. Like the different, there's I think a different memory of it. I don't know, I feel like abroad it's more of a fantasy which is disconnected from, I don't know.
I was just going to add that you can't, I'm not an expert on this, but you can't just turn reactors off. It's a process that is very difficult and must be controlled, and this was actually part of what led to the original Chernobyl nuclear catastrophe. Was they were basically doing a reset, and it was a test to shut down, turn it back on, it all went wrong. But one thing, there's very vivid accounts, written accounts, and also Alexei Rudinsky's new film is about, it's called Chernobyl 22. He's a filmmaker from Ukraine. He's got this film is about what happened under occupation in Chernobyl. Was it April last year? And what is the most terrifying thing for me personally is the as you see in all aspects of this war, is the incompetence of the Russians that were there, and the Ukrainians had to play this extremely difficult tightrope walk, whereby they wanted to let the Russian occupiers know that they were dominant and in control, but also to make sure that they could use the power plant effectively without causing another catastrophe. And it's really terrifying to hear about some of the things that they had to do and the deception that was needed to be used to ensure that they maintained a sense that it was still under Russian control. And one thing that encapsulates this is the Russians dug trenches in the most contaminated part of the exclusion zone. And I don't know if anyone else knows whether there's confirmation of this, but I've read reports quite frequently about people suffering from
Radiation poisoning.
Radiation sickness.
They let
but-
their soldiers lie in the trenches.
Yeah.
Who does that?
And these are places that you can kind of safely enter for less than a minute as a moving person, and they were kind of sleeping there. And so that incompetence is terrifying.
Just to add to the incompetence, the person who doesn't learn about the tragedy of Chernobyl at school, then in university, then from your national broadcaster, as we do in Ukraine, this is part of national memory. This is the fabric of our society. We know what Chernobyl is. We know what radiation poisoning is. For Russia, it was not a problem. And yet the world misspells Chernobyl and writes it the Russian way, Chernobyl. I wanted to share one anecdote to spread the joy of being Ukrainian killjoy about Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant and the silences. I was approached by one of the British national newspapers and asked to write an opinion piece about my parents fleeing from Zaporizhzhia and being on the road, and they really needed that sob story about a daughter waiting for her parents in Lviv and how worried I was. I wrote all that, but my piece also included my anxiety about the fighting near the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. And I submitted the piece on the 2nd of March. And on the 4th of March, the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant was shelled and then occupied by Russians. And the editor just changed the tense of the verbs, in my opinion, because what else would we do? It just happened. It was my tentative future tense, and it became present perfect tense. It has happened. More questions? Yeah, and let's do 3 in a row so that we can hear more from you and from our speakers.
Thank you so much for the fantastic presentation. So by coincidence, I'm from Ecocide as well. And I'm working at this point the topic on cultural representations of Chernobyl in popular culture. And I think so that this area can teach us a lot, because the image of mutants which you mentioned, so they are mainly present in the Western area, popular culture, you know, so, and they appear there because of the lack of information and stereotyping and things like that. So while I think that Ukrainian popular culture, vice versa, developed quite interesting images of Chernobyl, so just to mention Korshunov's project, so Kopilov's project, so which were done in the zone, and all of those raves which were organized there, you know. My question is, we have just listened to Daria's ideas about collecting stories, right? So I think that this idea of giving voice to people is very important. But how quick can we change this popular soft power response to what is happening right now? Because as specialists, we might speak in our areas for years and decide should we rebuild or we shouldn't rebuild the dam, you know, but I think that this powerful popular culture lenses, they're very often ignored or underappreciated. On the contrary, I think that they are very, very powerful. So what do you think about this popular culture response to what Chernobyl and to what the event which has just happened? Thank you.
Another question? Man in the back, please. In the blue and yellow t-shirt.
Thank you. I would have 2 questions, short questions. One on the damage by the war, because you see the rapid onset disasters, like now the flooding, but there's always a slow onset disaster, now the agricultural water missing, which will go dry in the next year. But everyone talked about drinking water for Crimea and irrigation for Ukraine. I said no drinking water in Ukraine would be affected. I would just like to know how many people did that dam provide drinking water to in Ukraine, because with the heating climate and water getting more scarce, I think that would also be an issue. And the other is on Zaporizhzhia, and I'm also afraid that why did Russians do it? That maybe it was just the fear that it was just to make a point. If they mine something, they're willing to go all the way. And and blow it up. But I was surprised, I read a LinkedIn post by a Ukraine government official that they're planning to build a lot of new small nuclear reactors, and they're planning to become world leader in building, nuclear reactors and take the world leadership on building nuclear reactors. I would just like to know, that really hurt me, that really pains. Is it a sentiment that this is okay in Ukraine for most of the population to build new nuclear reactors, or is it also an anti-nuclear movement in the Ukraine? Because when they talk about it, they will talk about it in this conference to go build on green energy and future of energy. They need at least 50% nuclear.
Yeah, thank you. So we have 3 questions already: popular culture and how quickly we can change the soft narratives about these catastrophes, disasters. The problem of drinking water and the problem of Ukrainian attitudes towards nuclear energy. Whoever wants to start.
Should I take the Chernobyl question? This is thank you for the question, because it's from my PhD research. One of the chapters of the book I'm writing has got a whole discussion of differences between the representations in Ukrainian popular culture and outside of Ukraine, and I have looked at things like Denis Kopilov's Arc Chernobyl, and there's some really, the aesthetics are just completely different. For example, Chichikan's Atomic Love video. Have you seen this thing? Totally different vibe, and it's not as fear-mongering, and it's clearly more lived in, it's more of a lived experience. But I think the key is not necessarily the difference between the kind of Ukrainian and non-Ukrainian representations, but it's a generational shift where more and more people don't have a direct memory of the event anymore, and so you can even see that in a creep of certain representations into more of Ukrainian youth. For example, the Stalker video game. For example, some of the real life stalkers, and those representations are now starting to move towards the foreign ones, because that direct link isn't quite there among some groups, or at least the ones that I've traced. So I think with trying to tell that story, I focused really only on nature. So it narrows the focus down quite a lot, but I'm sure that might be mappable onto other things too. I don't know.
Drinking water and the problem that Ukrainian population is facing with the blowing up of the dam.
Pass it on to you in a second, because you'll know more. But I just, from personal perspective, I have my family living in Odessa, and they're saying, I can't wash my vegetables anymore. There's E. coli, there's cholera, and that's in Odessa, which is 300 odd kilometers away from Kakhovka. And I fear to think what it's like for people who are on the ground. So I'd imagine it's Khersonshina, probably Crimea, Odessa region, huge swaths of territory. Mykolaiv, where my dad is. It's huge. From but I'm not an expert, but I know from anecdotal from my family, just being okay, we need to start boiling water again.
And at least I also don't know the numbers actually. It's definitely millions of people will be affected, and so definitely today also the Ministry of Economy was addressing the big room when we were discussing reconstruction, but also in this relation that they want to understand how to actually supply the population with fresh water. They want to build some pipes. I don't know. There is no understanding of how to actually manage it for the moment. But it's millions of people, literally. In Crimea, we have to understand that the canal it was already dry. Since they occupied Crimea, right? The canal was not working. So in Crimea, there was already a very big. I would say big issue with water, but at the same time, the locals were saying actually you don't feel it that much in some places. So it depends. But the problem is that they were exhausting the underground resources, which you are not even supposed to use because you actually exhaust them. In the end, there would be nothing, so there would be no water at all. So Crimea will definitely face huge problems, especially with climate change, for sure. And on the small modular reactors, just to say also, this is so. maybe for your understanding, at least this is, we may hear something new this week because the official conference will be tomorrow and the day after tomorrow, and there will be some announcements in terms of the long-term energy strategy of Ukraine. Basically, the government of Ukraine, they are also trying to make the economy work and survive, so whoever is coming with some great proposals, it all goes into the plan. So there is green hydrogen, great, green hydrogen. There is small modular reactors, great. New nuclear units, because we already have actually thousands of people working at Ukrainian nuclear power plants. There is a big industry, and they have their own lobby, right? So nuclear is good, gas, oil production, good. I don't know. Renewables also great for the future. Everybody agrees renewables are great. So you actually have a list of everything. And in terms of the small modular reactors, it's the American companies which are pushing this through because they actually want to find it's not a testing ground, but they also are signing agreements with Poland and Ukraine to actually see how this works. So anyway, but it's important to know that Ukrainians, because we did a few surveys in terms of the anti-nuclear movement in Ukraine, or does it exist or not, and I don't even know myself. Every time I'm asking Germans and Swiss, how come you decided to phase out nuclear and we don't? Because for them it was huge, and after Fukushima it was enormous. In Switzerland they had a referendum, they were voting to phase out nuclear, told not to build any new nuclear basically plants, and they decided yes. Fantastic. In Ukraine we don't have this at all. And we did the surveys in Ukraine, but the numbers, I remember for sure that most of the Ukrainians are in for the energy transition with renewables mostly. So it's not like Ukrainians are supporting nuclear, but I think for them it's just something that is there already. Maybe they're not even asking themselves where electricity is coming from. Now I think they do already, now they know. Since 24th of February, or since rather autumn last year. But it's very actually strange, and I still don't have actually an answer to why in Ukraine, in the country of Chernobyl, we don't have this very large, similarly larger than Germany, big movement. That it used to be there, it brought us to independence, but then vanished.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, actually we might connect, coming back to nuclear expansion, nuclear movement, and the popular change in kind of the popular mobilization. I think the fact that not only Ukrainians but people abroad went out on the streets in the beginning, first days of the invasion, really made a change, because Western countries are mostly democracies, and politicians, they care about what the public thinks as well. When I was trying to lobby for weapons for Ukraine the first days of March, I was kind of consulted by a former MP, and he told me that very efficient strategy is to send letters. So citizens send letters to their representatives, because those letters are actually read. And so what we were doing, we were kind of trying to organize a campaign, listing all the air defense that Ukraine would need, and just asking people to just contact their representatives. So I wonder if something like that could be done for nuclear sanctions. So there is when people go out and they protest, but also when they contact and email, and this kind of in democracies, this popular mobilization does work. It does work in authoritarian states. But I think that's because honestly, when the full-scale invasion started, most people didn't know anything about Ukraine, and it's the effort of all of us, and it's small effort. So I do believe in that this does play a role. So it gives me a bit of optimism, I guess. But
so urging people on social media to do that kind of thing is a good thing.
I mean, we were doing we had a template. I was advised by military strategists what to put there. So there would be a pre-template to circulate, and then asking people to use the template, because most of us don't know much about air defense or something. So maybe we could
Will you help me?
We can maybe
Let's do it.
organize. But also Eco-Action has also this environmental call together with other organizations, right? For solidarity.
Yeah, there were. I mean, and I think in Ukraine some organizations are. I think UA Animals are also trying to do to work on the topic, because actually we didn't discuss about this, but also animals.
Oh, hugely.
Yeah.
From big to tiny, I don't even.
Yeah. Anyway, but there are
the animals in the red book that are, that you can't get back.
Also, the actual the animals household. Yeah, people were saving their dogs and cats and
cows are being washed up on Odessa shores. It's like
Yeah.
And let's not forget about, like, just last year in April, from what I know, and I don't know what the numbers are now, but 50,000 dolphins were washed up on the shores of the Black Sea because of Russian sonar. It's just completely destroyed them. So, you know, as soon as I found out about that, I was like, actually, wow, there's a huge ecocide going on. Let's read about this dam. Let's interview people about this dam. Because, yeah, so it's loads of areas. And we've just kind of like, unfortunately, just scratched the surface today. So it's time for action.
We have time for one last question.
Thank you. I think one of the shocking things of last week's media response is the sort of unambiguous two-sidism which you've mentioned there. And it indicates perhaps that people don't yet understand, even now, Putin's mindset is that he's provoked by weakness. And when he doesn't see any pushback or see any retribution, he will unleash further violence. What, therefore, is your worries around Zaporizhia nuclear power station in that the insipid response he's received from this eco-terrorism may encourage him to go further?
Would anyone dare to answer?
Just kind of like a brief, a brief kind of observation. I think, you know, and I've said this before, even a 3-year-old knows a bully's kind of psychology. You know that if you've got this mindless kind of like, I want to destroy you because I don't even know, you hit them on the nose and they back off. And that, I think, was a huge mistake that's happened. This is what we needed to do in the West, and, you know, I don't know, we needed to be helped. You need to go and hit the bully on the nose and they're gonna go away. Not all of this, oh gosh, but Zaporizhia and he's gonna blow everyone. No, yeah, he will blow everyone up if he doesn't get a hit on the nose. Do it. That's my kind of response. This is a very valid question, and thank you for asking it. Sorry, I'm just so pissed off about this thing. It's a bully. Give them, get them back, get them out, because he just understands power. He's stuck somewhere in the 19th century. He doesn't let anyone. Everyone said, "Oh, Putin, he's got rationality." No, he's isolated in his bunker. He doesn't let anyone in. He's got a map, and he's just completely, you know, it's all in a really weird vacuum, and we're all suffering. And he needs to just be hit on the nose.
Just one thing about hitting the
Sorry.
But I think it may be even a good, you know, if it's ending or not, but a lot, maybe everything will depend on Ukraine's counteroffensive this year. And even with Kakhovka, just after maybe 3-4 days, many people volunteers who were collecting money for the army, but then decided to help people in Kakhovka, and they kept saying, look, we have to be helping these people, of course. But honestly, to avoid even worse, we have to help Ukrainians restore their territorial integrity and win, exactly, and do everything that you just said. This is the key for everything. So please, even if in the counter-offensive we don't reach, you know, as far as we should, then it means that just let's keep supporting. Because it's a matter of security of everyone. And yes, we are talking about reconstruction, but this is the...
See, if you keep putting patches on, it's okay for a bit, but if the bully keeps hitting you, and in the end they just kill you. Yeah. And that's their psychology as well. It's like, if I can't have you, I will destroy you. Like an abusive ex-partner. Oh, I can't have you and the children, I'll kill you, and then I'll kill myself as well. You know, looking at everything that they're doing with the dam or with the nuclear power, it's going to affect the Russians. It doesn't care. It's just destroy everything. That's their psychology, and we have to keep that in mind. And as you said, just keep helping Ukrainians to fight off this evil.
Pressure the government.
Pressure the government.
Faster weapons, more weapons now, right?
It's really, really hot.
And thank you, the UK, for your support so far. It's been fantastic. Thank you. And I really thank you, everyone who helped.
Yeah, me too.
Thank you so so much for the fantastic speakers. I've learned a lot. I'm glad that we shared some strategies for resistance.